These are the competitive procurement standards located at Title II, Part 200, Sections 317 to 326 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Procurement standards for CDBG projects are covered under Sections 317 to 326 of Part 200 of Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations. For the purposes of CDBG, public infrastructure, and housing grant funds, the main points to follow are A, on using local procedures if they conform to federal law. Yes, they do, because the state passed GATA several general assemblies ago, which adopted federal 2 CFR 200 as the standards for all financial aid provided by the state. You also maintain contractor oversight. And another key point that's pertinent for our funds, if your activity delivery is being purchased through an intergovernmental agreement agency or an inter-entity agreement agency, the first is generally a regional plan commission, the second could be a economic development corporation, then competitive bidding is not required for an activity delivery contract signed with one of those two firms. The main highlight of this slide is point H, use responsible contractors, and that means your prime contractors have to be registered on sam.gov and be not debarred on sam.gov. The subcontractors they select must all be verified to be not debarred on sam.gov. For almost 30 years, competition has been the main point of procurement using federal funds, and 2 CFR 200 codifies that much more strongly. This competition is designed to ensure a full, open, and competitive procurement process using the following methods, including no geographic preference. CDBG through the state of Illinois is federally funded, and therefore a contractor cannot be excluded simply because they are from a state other than Illinois. Labor standards will cover the procurement of the actual workforce that the contractor has to use, but as far as the procurement of a prime contractor or a sub for construction or even for activity delivery, there is no geographic preference for federal CDBG funds. Next, we'll cover the methods of procurement to be followed for different types of funding, but with a heavy emphasis on construction, whether that's infrastructure construction or housing rehab construction. There are 5 methods of procurement that may be followed under 2 CFR 200 for procurement. The ones that most apply to CDBG funding are B and C, procurement by small purchase procedures, and procurement by sealed bids under C. There is a micro purchase procurement method that's an option. The next slide will cover the dollar limits for that were increased on June 20th of 2018. Micro purchases may be used where the estimated dollar amount of the purchase would be $10,000 or less, or for construction spending, $2,000 or less. Procurement by small purchase procedures is when the total estimated cost of the contract would be $250,000 or less. Small purchase procedures may be used for the procurement of activity delivery, rehabilitation administration, or architectural or engineering services. If you use small purchase procedures, there's no requirement for formal bid advertising. You would either phone, mail, or email solicitations to at least 3 potential qualified bidders. You could make the bid packet available for pickup, mailing, or emailing to those potential bidders, and you would accept no less than 2 bidders. If one bidder only submits a bid, then the community must document a reason for that sole bidder. Architectural and engineering services, when bid under small purchase procedures, may include price as a factor, but not be the sole factor. Next up, the food chain and procurement is procurement by sealed bids, which means through formal advertising of the bids, and that would be for almost all CDBG, PI, and housing rehab construction, because they are above $2,000 for the prime contracts. Bid proposals must contain a detailed description. 2 or more responsible bidders are required, and each bid requires a firm fixed price offer. When we say responsible, we mean for prime contractors that they are both registered and current on the federal sam.gov website, that they have signed and included all required CDBG certifications, and that the community has no knowledge of poor performance by the bidder in either their community or other communities. Bidding requirements include publicly advertised, in a general newspaper, and give sufficient notice. Sufficient notice could be, we've had anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks to 30 days, but I'd say if they have 2 weeks or more, that's sufficient under 2 CFR 200. There may be additional Davis-Bacon publication specifications, so also pay attention to that slideshow. You have sufficient specifications, in the bid packets going out, that there's a public bid opening announced in the publication, and that bid opening date is adhered to and should match, the actual opening should match what is published. The contract should be awarded to the lowest responsible qualified bidder. The previous slide we discussed responsibility of contractors. And then you can reject bids only for a sound reason. Just a reminder that the procurement of CDBG or other funded construction that will be listed in the eventual grant agreement that is above $2,000 must be by sealed bids preceded by formal bid advertising only. Construction cannot be done above $2,000 under micro purchase or small purchase procedures. Procurement by competitive proposals is fairly rare under regular CDBG, public infrastructure, or housing, and is occasionally used under economic development if engineering is being funded. If architectural or engineering services are being funded by CDBG or other funds that will be listed in the eventual grant agreement, then QBS may be allowed for the procurement of those. The last method of procurement under 2 CFR 200 is procurement by non-competitive proposals. Since those are generally not allowed under Illinois CDBG and would require the permission of management ahead of time, we're not really going to go and discuss those in great detail today. As with almost all contracting, in addition to the formal procurement method to ensure competition, which is what 2 CFR 200 does, there are requirements for minority business enterprise certification and etc. And here is a list of those other requirements, and there will be additional Davis-Bacon requirements provided in that slideshow. Next, we'll discuss contract cost and price. The grantee needs to maintain a price analysis for the prime contract and any modifications to it. Profit calculations for contracts with no price competition, estimated contract cost, and finally cost plus contracts are not allowed. As to item A, price analysis for contract modifications, CDBG generally allows up to a 25% variance before requiring permission from DCO to go above that and potentially rebid for the additional work. So there is a 25% variance from the original prime contract bid before you have to let DCO know. As with almost all federal funds, there is a federal agency or pass-through entity review of the procurement done by the grantee, which in this case, your community is the sub-grantee of HUD, and then the grantee of the state. The community's procurement documentation should be available to review by DCO at any time. Generally, it is reviewed if the grant is selected for an on-site or a desk monitoring review, and then you would have, you provide your labor standards folders to your DCO grant manager. However, you must make available the documentation for procurement if one of those 5 conditions comes up as part of the procurement, and you let your grant manager know ahead of time, and they'll work with you to verify that the procurement was done properly. Our final topic under 2 CFR 200 procurement is bonding requirements required generally for construction contracts funded by CDBG or other funds that will be included in the grant agreement. CDBG's construction bonding requirements include a bid bond of 5% of the bid, a performance bond of 100% of the contract price, and a payment bond of 100% of the contract price. Copies of the bonds must be maintained in the grant administrator's labor standards or procurement files and available to the CDBG grant monitor before a monitoring visit, or if required, provide them during the labor standards verification process. You'd be surprised on monitoring visits how many times one or more of those bonds has not been provided by the engineer to the grant administrator. So do that while you're doing your contractor verification, or the engineer is doing the contractor verification. That way they're available and there's no delay during the monitoring process. 2 CFR 200.326 contains general contract provisions. For the sake of brevity, we will allow you to research those on your own to make sure your construction contracts, engineering contracts, activity delivery contracts contained any federally required language. Here's the contact information for any questions you may have on procurement under Federal 2 CFR 200.